Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So this is a video that I have kind of been avoiding since being asked to do it. I'm not a professional designer. This is strictly a hobby for me. I do keep up a few yards that I have been requested to, and I worked on some design plans for a historical home in our area, which I'm grateful for, but by no means am I a professional, and not everybody works in the same manner. So full disclosure, you may or may not like this style of video, especially if you're a designer. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to do my best here. So let's jump into today's video and pray to God we both get through it. A number of my Instagram followers have requested this video, like I said, and I'm frankly kind of shocked. Now, I usually in my own garden am a flyby, the seat of my pants type of gardener where I place stuff. I usually, when I go to the garden center, I pick up a number of things and I kind of just throw them where I know that they have the best shot and pray for the best. Now, I don't necessarily have a color scheme in my yard. I do prefer darker, more moody colors, richer colors versus pastels. So you're going to see a lot more of that in my garden. But I do like to use a few elements that I know work within design plans to try to maintain a cohesiveness and or sense of style within the garden. So the first thing when I jump into designing a new garden is I like to make sure that I have every measurement possible that I can roughly get for whether it's a specific area or if I'm designing an entire yard. Now I haven't got the chance to design an entire yard. That would be really awesome, but I know from, at least from my experience, making sure that you have the main key elements of the area well measured out and your boundaries of what you're allowed to design in are critical. So the first thing I would suggest is getting out a tape measure and just simply going around your area that you're working with and making sure that you get all of the sight lines down and have those down on paper. And the best way to do that is, again, with a tape measure, simply a pen or a pencil. And I like to use these larger pads of graph paper. They are sectioned out into 4x4 squares, which equal to 1 inch on paper. If you're using a ruler, which I suggest to have, helps you just create nice straight lines. But my most common used measurement are 2 squares by 2 squares, and that equals 1 foot for me, usually within the design plans that I'm working on. Another option, if you can't seem to find the larger ones, the larger pads of graph paper, is Walmart does have these bindered, is that a word? Binder of graph paper available. They're about $2, and I took the sticker off, and I don't know how many pages are in here, roughly probably about 100, but they have just simple graph paper. There's no extra lines to really designate it off of, but they're really great to start with if you're just getting in and you're just starting on basic designs. So now that you have your measurements, it's really time to kind of get a feel for the area and what the purpose of this space is going to be. Whether this is just a straight up flower bed, is there an area that you need to sit? Is there anything that you need to obscure, whether it be another building? Maybe you don't want to see your fence completely. Are you trying to block a view of a compost bin? So these are things that you want to think about, and also make sure you get a general visual or an actual measurement of height wise on. That is something that I always try to make sure I get as well, is from my view, or the highest person that lives in the home, a rough estimate of at least 2 to 2.5 times their height of how high I at least need to be to block out a feature that might be in a distance. If it's something that's right there next to them, you need to be able to get a measurement on just how tall that object is that you're trying to fully block out. Another thing that you want to think about when you're taking your measurements is how far your windows are in from corners and such, and how wide those windows are and height wise, so that you're not interfering with those areas for your sight views. Or maybe you're planning to add a window box feature to this and you don't want to necessarily cover up the beautiful box, or have the option to not be able to see your trailing plants out of it if that's what you want to do. So keep that in mind as well. Also think about in the surrounding areas, maybe something that you're trying to capture. If you're getting a borrowed view from, say, your neighbor's yard, or you have an open forest next to you, but you want to really take attention to maybe a beauty or shrub that has a great shape or color to it, and you want to borrow that for in your plan, make sure that you don't put something in that where your seating area might be or a walking area might be to block that view. Make sure you rough estimate in your measurement of where that object could be visual for you, so that that object doesn't get blocked out. Now that we've got our measurements, we need to remember to make sure we know how much sun this area gets. There's going to be a lot of design challenges that come with each variety, whether it be part sun, or full shade, or dappled shade. There's plenty of plants out there available for these areas, but it gets a lot more the options get a little bit less as you get into more shade. So you're going to have to be a little more creative with this design process, but there's some things we can talk about here in our part 2. Another thing you need to think about is, if this isn't just a project that you're working on and just throwing a bed in, you might need to hire in somebody for drainage issues, or you might need to be putting a retaining wall in, level out an area. Now, make sure before you do any digging, you do call the extension line to have your yard surveyed for any electrical lines, gas lines, and such like that. They'll come out, it's totally free. Mark out the area before you do any of the major digging. And then any of the water issues that you may need to deal with, this is something that you need to make sure you call your local city on, because there are regulations on moving and dispersing water off of your property into another property. So you'll have to figure that out, but there's also great advantages of having a damp spot in a garden that you could maybe make a rain garden out of. Now, if there's anything I've missed in this section that might require a code or a phone call to something, do not hold me responsible. This is something that you need to think about and deal with on your own. This is just a primer or just an idea of how to get you started in your design, and something that you may or may not have to consult with a city contractor or pull permits for. Each scenario is going to be very specific, so I am not accountable for any issues that you may run into. I'm sorry. Along the lines of whether you have a damp area or a dry area, you need to know your soil type. What kind of plants are going to be able to handle this? Whether it's full sun or full shade or part sun, plants are very specific to areas and or how they can handle the areas that you have present. So we need to address that. So I would just make that an opportunity to just put your shovel in just a little bit, kind of get an idea of what you're dealing with, know your soil, handle it, see how it crumbles, see if it's dry, see if it's wet on a normal day, and kind of just assess what you're seeing and go from there as far as the basis. It's pretty easy to understand whether or not you're going to have dry or sandy soil, or heavy clay, or a very watery, wet area. So just kind of make note of that in the design process. Aside from handling the soil just on a normal day, you would maybe want to even consider digging a hole out, filling it with water, and then timing how long it takes for that water to completely drain away into the surrounding soil. And that'll give you an idea of if you have fast or slow draining soil. And another thing you want to consider is on rainy days, just how much this area is holding water on its surface. Sometimes water might be rushing past this area. It might be holding area because it's a lower sloped area. So on heavy rain days, or even on gradual rain days, just kind of go out and see how much this area is holding water as well. This is a good indicator that you might already have a heavy clay area, but digging down in the soil and just kind of looking at it will give you a good idea of just what that soil structure looks like. Another thing that you might want to consider is, are you landscaping against your house or a garage, shed, or some type of other building? You might want to consider the backdrop color of these objects, whether you have a white house or a dark house, or a colored home. These are going to be things that really work for or against you in your design. And what I mean by that is some colors of plants are not going to show up against certain colors of home. So say if you have a blue house, if you go and put a red leafed plant such as a Japanese maple near that, it's really going to pop off and be a focal point plant. You're really going to be drawn to that. Chartreuse would be the same way. A variegated plant might actually be more calming and kind of lend itself to the house a little bit, especially if you have white accents. The thing with the blue house is if you have a blue spruce or something with a blue cast, such as like a gray leaved plant, this is going to kind of blend away, and that's not what you want. So choose these plants wisely and maybe further out in the yard to complement the design and color of your home versus putting them near or up against these surfaces where you're not going to get that visual impact that you want. Now for a red brick home, it's kind of the same. You're not going to put any red plants up against this type of house. Unless you have a dark green plant behind it, it really isn't going to jump off in the same way it would in any other scenario. So that's something to think about. Maybe working in lime green plants or bluer plants with the greens and dark greens. This is going to be a better combo for you in that section versus adding red plants into it. You'll probably want to put those out further in the yard and maybe away so that it's not immediate backdrop. Now that you kind of have some of the basis going on, what you're looking at here, and you've made a list of your measurements, your sun, your soil, your backdrop colors, design idea, like the things that you need to cover up. Now it's time to start thinking about what your design style is. Now I know this is kind of up into your own discretion. Now I have a farmhouse style home with a color palette that is ugly and we're planning to change. So going into this, you might have a more colonial home, Victorian home, very modern, mid-century modern. You might have a basic ranch or a log cabin. So you need to work in styles that would lend themselves to these. Now there's a number of great sources out there on Instagram and in magazines and catalogs to give you plenty of ideas. So what I would consider doing is starting a fresh board if you're using Pinterest, for your immediate saves on what you're doing now. Pinterest now has, within a board, you can make a new board that's like a sub board that I can now take pictures and specifically place them in there if I'm trying to hone in something specific. So I've got my gardening and then new garden design. So I've saved some really great ideas over the years that I thought were clever or great pairings that I can use for when I'm using at my clients or upcoming plans for other people. But then I have my personal style right there, and that's what I'm currently working on. So I really would suggest, if you're a person that gets bogged down and you're watching this because you're trying to figure out how to design something, limit the amount of time you are on Pinterest or Instagram or any of your visuals, because you will get bogged down and then you will start fighting with yourself on really what you're going for, and then it could ruin your what you know is in your heart and what's in your mind already of what the style you kind of want to go with. I would assume you have already maybe honed in on some of the keywords that are in the titles of what design style you're wanting to go with, or maybe there's some key features that you really know and you've now gone in and specifically searched those things and saved a couple of them. At the end of a week, I would kind of go through that folder and really analyze each of those pictures and make a note of what you like about that picture. Is it a plant combination? Is it a structure? Is it a hardscape? Is it a material that they used on the hardscape? Is it a fence? Is it a certain color you're starting to see a theme of in there? Is there a lot of, straight boxwood hedges? There's many things that you're going to pick up in your saves that maybe you didn't notice before, and that's a great place to start and a great way to start working up your design. Now that you're kind of figuring out your style, there's a number of styles, and we could sit here all day and go through those plans and give you ideas on how they are, but we'll do that in part 2 to kind of help you hone in a little bit more and then make up some design plans to go within it to get you kind of started in a space. So one thing I really like to start with in a new bed design is getting it down on paper. I'm simply using some graph paper here, and I'm going to draw out the basic measurements. Like I said, I like to use a 2x2 square for this. If you're dealing with a larger design, which if you're just starting, I would consider starting with a small bed to really amp up and get to those larger sections. But if you're dealing with a large specific area, you'll have to go larger. But I like to use a 2x2 square. Again, I'm just using a ruler here and a mechanical pencil, and then I have my graph paper here, and I'll just draw out the basic framework of that bed. The project that I'm currently working on is our front garden design. Now this area has been a little bit challenging because I have overhead wires that I need to consider. I have a ditch that comes back 6 feet from the road that I need to worry about. And then I need to leave enough grass in our front yard to please the other half. But I also want to make sure that I have it deep enough that I can put in some ornamental trees, evergreens, layered shrubs, and perennials, and maybe spots for bulbs and annuals as well. So making sure that you give yourself enough space is really good. So for example, in this bed, it is 48 feet long, and that's from the edge of our driveway to the edge of a flower bed that already exists. And that is based off of a shrub that I want to make sure I have a clear straight line to, because I don't want to move it again, and I really love this shrub. And it's also 23 feet deep. Now, this is an extreme measurement for some people. I know that most of us are working in more narrow spaces, especially in smaller gardens. So this might be a large example, but I also have some smaller examples for you coming up in our part 2. So keep that in mind. But for this area, I need to make sure that I have available depth for some of the trees, and still be able to place annuals and perennials and shrubs and stuff like that around it. This might not be your case. You might just want a good solid hedge where you could just put in a row of arborvitaes and still have enough lawn to play in. In our case, I kind of want a layered, more natural look, so that's why we went with that depth. At this point, if you're doing a small, narrow area, I would consider no shorter in depth of about 6 foot. This is going to give you the best options to give you the best display and be able to work comfortably, not have any regrets. You can always go bigger, so if you want to start small and just put in your hedges and such like that, by all means go ahead. But from there, I would slowly start bringing that bed out a little bit more, unless you're putting on a pathway that might be stonework or such like that. You might want to really consider doing the biggest bed you know you want now and have it done. Another good thing to think about when you're starting to design your gardens is repetition. Now this is taking maybe a key plant that you're using throughout your yard, or a key hardstone material. If you're using retaining walls or any type of stonework in there, you'll want to repeat these throughout the beds or new design areas so that there's a sense of cohesion. Maybe continue in boxwoods or a specific plant such as a perennial or a grass. Another thing you can think of is just color scheme can be repeated so that there is that sense of cohesion throughout. So cottage gardeners, take a hint here, and I'm saying this myself, think about using another plant that you already have in repetition so that your design becomes a little bit more cohesive and a little less chaotic. In the next video, I want to start putting some stuff down on paper to help you handle some maybe scenarios that you're dealing with, and maybe give you some ideas of combinations of plants that I have found that really work together and plants that are tried and true. This could be an ongoing series of maybe some plants that are good for wet areas, hot sunny areas, dry shade, that type of things that I've used or I have had friends in my area use that we found good success. So stay tuned for more of those, or comment down below and tell me if you really like that idea. If you found this video to be helpful and you enjoyed it and you're excited about part 2, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, put the bell button notification on, because that'll let you know when part 2 comes out, and sound off in the comments what you found most helpful, whether it be a tip or maybe something that I missed or something that you really want to see in our next video, and I'll be happy to cover that and talk with you as well on the comments. So until then, we'll see you in the next video. Bye.